I would like to say welcome to all of you to this, our 278th CACOR Live presentation. And it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Elizabeth Anderson, who will be giving our presentation today, A Battle for Hearts and Minds, Cognitive Warfare and Democratic Defense from Europe to Canada. Elizabeth is a former Fulbright scholar, and she deals with defending democracies in the digital age. Her work centers around cognitive and gray zone warfare. She also is looking at, particularly looking at ensuring that Canada and its allies and partners are prepared for the 21st century and threats across cyberspace. She looks at everything in the electromagnetic domains, and she looks at three areas of expertise: cognitive and gray zone warfare, Ukraine's defense against Russian aggression and transatlantic security, and Canada's defense and industrial strategy beyond. And beyond these priorities, she's engaged in broad Canadian foreign and defense policies with the hope that we can make it through the next few years and looking at what's going to happen with AI and quantum and making sure that the democratic resilience continues into the future. With that, Elizabeth, I would like to say thank you for coming today, and over to you.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to hearing your questions following the presentation. So, the supreme art of war, a battle for hearts and minds. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Sun Tzu wrote that 2,500 years ago. China still teaches it. Russia never stopped using it. It is possible to lose the war between liberal democratic values and our way of life to authoritarian powers by failing to recognize their aim to coerce and subvert Western citizens' will to resist. Russia has been using these tactics since the Cold War and even before. The West won in part because we understood the power of free thought. Recently, the West has grown complacent. We believed we were at the end of history, that liberal democracy and free market capitalism had won. In retrospect, we were foolish to ever believe this. Our adversaries certainly didn't. What's changed isn't the strategy, it's the technology. Digital platforms and AI have supercharged these subversion tactics. They can engineer opinion at scale, fragment our attention, erode trust in truth itself. We are entering geopolitical winter, and put simply, our way of life depends on democracy functioning, on adapting, on surviving. Right now, democracy is under attack, not with weapons, but through the manipulation of the very freedom that makes democracy work. Part 1, your mind is a theater of war, the domain we don't see. In traditional sets of war, we think of war as kinetic forces on land, sea, air, and in recent decades, cyber and space. But what if your mind was a theater of war? That's cognitive warfare, the idea that your mind is actually a domain. Our adversaries are using tools powered by AI, cyber, and other emerging technologies expanding at a rate we couldn't foresee even 5 years ago to attack citizens in democracies. Democracy depends on the individual freedom to choose one's own future. John Diefenbaker said, "I am a Canadian, free to speak without fear, free to worship God in my own way, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose what I believe wrong, free to choose those who govern my country. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and all mankind." The whole idea, we the people decide. But what if adversaries have perfected ways to manipulate our populations so the decisions we make aren't actually in our best interest? It should be Canadians, not the Kremlin, not the CCP, deciding what happens in Canada. Cognitive warfare, how it works. Adversaries targeting our information space is just as much a threat to our sovereignty as a kinetic attack on our land or economic coercion of our markets. Every Canadian is especially aware of the latter. Elbows up, never 51. These are rallying cries that have united us in defense of our sovereignty and our way of life. America is seeking to coerce us into making policy and regulatory decisions that benefit it, not us. We all know that this is a threat to our sovereignty, and we are all very aware of what is at stake. Cognitive warfare is the same. It is just harder to see. It's an attempt to control our decisions, our policies, our future, not through military force or economic pressure, but through manipulation of what we believe, what we trust, and who we are. Cognitive warfare operates through 4 vectors. First, message. What resonates? They exploit real grievances, historical wounds, identity divisions, institutional failures. There's a reason these messages land. Citizens are genuinely upset, frustrated, disengaged. Adversaries didn't create these vulnerabilities, but they are weaponizing them. Second, messenger. Who delivers it? State media, such as RT, bot networks, influencers, and most powerfully, platform algorithms doing the work for them. The messenger often isn't obvious. Third, medium. How does it spread? Platforms engineer for engagement, not truth. Systems designed to amplify rage, fear, and division because that's what keeps you scrolling. Cross-domain integration, cyber attacks combined with information operations, timed for maximum impact. Finally, audience. Who's targeted? Diaspora communities facing transnational repression right here in Canada, youth who are digital natives but lack frameworks to recognize manipulation, anyone whose attention can be captured and weaponized. The goal. The goal isn't just to persuade you against a certain view. The goal is to make you lose trust in the concept of truth itself. When you can't tell what's real, you can't make informed decisions. And when you can't make informed decisions, democracy stops functioning. There's an expression, militaries win battles, economies win wars. That's true, but it misses something. Wars are also won and lost in the hearts and minds of the people. We created the vulnerabilities they're exploiting. The honest truth. Trust and social cohesion are collapsing across liberal democracies. Why? Some of it, let's be honest, is our own failed policies. Inequality, polarization, institutions that don't deliver, governments that disappoint. These are real problems, real frustrations, real reasons people are angry. But here's what's happening. Adversaries are exploiting those exact vulnerabilities, amplifying them, weaponizing them through disinformation, AI-powered manipulation, platforms engineered to maximize outrage. They're not creating the fire, they're pouring gasoline on it. Why security is more than defense. If we care about protecting our sovereignty, we must care about protecting the information and cognitive space that is increasingly a battle space being used by our top adversaries, Russia and China. This isn't just a military problem. It's not just intelligence. It's not just cybersecurity. Security now means whole of society resilience. Civil, military, private citizen integration. All of us together. Government and decision makers have very little awareness of cognitive warfare. Understandable, given it's a fairly new expansion of adversary toolkits, but we need to close the gap rapidly. Within NATO, there is recognition of cognitive warfare, and increasingly so. The Science and Technology Office just produced its first ever full-fledged report on cognitive warfare, but we face challenges getting it recognized as a formal domain and increasing its awareness across the alliance and beyond. Therefore, it's the responsibility of governments to step up individually, to recognize this from their own policy standpoint, so democracies can work together and address the threats facing their citizens today. Part 3. We all have skin in this fight. Those who know what freedom costs. Finland teaches 7-year-olds about cognitive warfare. Lithuania has total defense that includes historical memory education as a military capability. Lithuania also built digital governance as cognitive defense. Sweden sent "if crisis or war comes" to every household. They understand something we've forgotten. Democracy doesn't just run itself. You have to actively protect it. John F. Kennedy famously said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." We need to get back there. Civic engagement isn't optional. It's the core of democracy. And in an era of cognitive warfare, civic engagement means opening your eyes to the battle already being waged. Think about the protests we've seen in Georgia, in Hungary, in Serbia. Think about the incredible resistance by brave Ukrainian men and women fighting every day for freedoms we already enjoy. They understand what freedom costs. Do we? Those who don't live under democratic systems know what it means to live without choice. They know what it means when the government decides what you can think, what you can say, what you can know. We're better off living under a system that protects rule of law, human rights, liberal democratic values. We're better off living under a system where we are free. But freedom isn't self-sustaining. The choice is ours. The stakes. We are stronger together. We are better off for our democratic way of life, but we must open our eyes to the battle already being waged. We must become engaged within our democratic institutions and demand better from our politicians when they fail to deliver. We all have skin in this fight. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Our adversaries understand this. They're betting that we won't recognize the war until we've already lost. But here's what they're underestimating. Once we see it, we can defend against it. Cognitive warfare works in darkness, in complacency, in the gap between the war being waged and our recognition of it. So, here's what I'm asking you. Open your eyes, see the domain, recognize the threat. Geopolitical winter is coming. The question isn't whether we'll face this threat. The question is whether we'll face it prepared or unprepared, together or divided, awake or asleep. I am an optimist by nature, but even if I wasn't, I believe hope is strategic. Without hope, we definitely won't make progress. Without hope, evil is sure to win. Those living without freedom understand the costs. Now it's our turn to prove, so do we. Now I've just laid out the broad strokes, but I want to take you deeper into the research, into the frameworks that explain why this works, who's doing it, and what democracies can actually do about it. This comes from a major research project I've been conducting across Europe over the past several months. Approximately 100 interviews with government officials, military practitioners, technology executives, think tank experts, civil society leaders, and academics across 15 countries, plus the EU and NATO institutions. Let me share 3 core arguments from that work. First, the target is the mind and the needs that make us human. Let me take you to Kyiv right now, this month. Russia has systematically targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Throughout December and January, repeated waves of hundreds of drones and missiles. Temperatures have dropped to minus 20 degrees Celsius. Nearly half of Kyiv's apartment buildings, almost 6,000, have lost heat. Hundreds of thousands without power. Kyiv is now a humanitarian crisis. A 91-year-old woman told reporters this week she hasn't seen winter this harsh since 1942, since World War II. Windows ice up on the inside, people can see their breath indoors, elderly people are dying in their apartments, freezing to death. Others have been killed by carbon monoxide poisoning because they're using makeshift heating, candles, bricks on gas stoves, anything to stay warm. And when emergency responders arrive to help after a strike, Russia launches a second wave. It's called a double tap attack. Earlier this month, a 56-year-old paramedic was killed this way, responding to the initial strike when another hit. They deliberately target first responders. This is a war crime under international humanitarian law. Now, what is the military objective here? It isn't the transformer. It isn't the power grid itself. The objective is the will to resist. Physical attacks serve psychological purposes. Energy warfare is will warfare. The deliberate killing of civilians, of the elderly freezing in their homes, of the paramedics trying to save them, and the innocent, countless lives that Russia has cost is designed to break not just infrastructure, but the social fabric itself, to make people afraid to help each other, to exhaust them into submission. The target is always ultimately the mind. This is what we mean by cognitive warfare. Activities conducted in synchronization with other instruments of power to affect attitudes and behavior by influencing, protecting, or disrupting cognition. But here's what makes this so effective, and this is crucial to understand. Cognitive warfare succeeds not through superior argument, but by exploiting universal psychological needs. What needs? The same needs that make us human. Safety and security. We're wired to attend to threats. Fear captures attention and impairs deliberation. Adversaries amplify crime, terrorism, immigration as existential dangers. They make the world feel more dangerous than it is. Belonging and connection. Social connection is a fundamental need. Exclusion registers as physical pain. Adversaries sharpen in-group, out-group boundaries. They tell marginalized communities, your country doesn't want you. They tell majorities, you're being replaced. Esteem and dignity. We need to feel valued, respected, capable. Adversaries exploit status anxiety. Elites despise you. They weaponize the dignity wounds from economic dislocation, cultural change, political marginalization. Meaning and coherence. We need the world to make sense. Uncertainty is aversive. Adversaries flood the information environment with contradictions, undermine shared epistemic foundations, then offer simple explanatory narratives, conspiracies, scapegoats. Identity and continuity. We need a stable sense of who we are and where we belong. Adversaries deploy historical revisionism. Your identity is under attack. Weaponized nostalgia. Here's the policy implication, and this is critical. Cognitive defense is not primarily a communications problem. If citizens feel unsafe, excluded, disrespected, confused, or unmoored, no amount of media literacy or countering messaging will protect them from manipulation that speaks to real grievances. Adversaries exploit real needs. This is why social cohesion is a precondition, not an outcome. It's why the recommendations in my research span economic policy, integration, democratic reform, and institutional trust building, not just counter disinformation. Social policy is cognitive defense infrastructure. Why democracies are structurally vulnerable. So if that's how it works psychologically, let's talk about why democracies are structurally vulnerable. First, our openness. Free expression protects malicious speech alongside legitimate discourse. Open information environments can't be secured without becoming authoritarian. Our values constrain our defensive options. Second, the platform problem. Algorithmic amplification rewards engagement, including outrage. Business models profit from attention regardless of social cost, and these US-based platforms sit beyond direct democratic control. Third, trust as attack surface. High trust societies are more efficient, but more vulnerable to betrayal. Institutional trust enables democracy, eroding it disables democracy. Trust is difficult to build and easy to destroy. Fourth, pluralism. Diverse societies have more fracture lines to exploit. Identity politics provides ready-made divisions. Legitimate grievances become ammunition. Fifth, speed, asymmetry. Manipulation spreads faster than correction. Democratic deliberation is slow. Adversary operations are fast. There's first mover advantage in narrative space. Sixth, the attribution problem. Plausible deniability is built into these operations. Democratic publics demand proof before response. Our legal standards aren't suited to hybrid threats. The threat landscape, an uncomfortable truth. Now, let me tell you something uncomfortable about the threat landscape. What Russia and China are doing to Western democracies did to others for decades. The CIA funded dissident media, orchestrated coups exploiting social fractures, Iran in 1953, Guatemala in 1954, Chile in 1973. They've cultivated elite assets, manipulated foreign elections. The UK's Information Research Department ran global propaganda operations from 1948 to 1977. France ran influence networks through the Francafrique system. I'm not saying this to create moral equivalence. I'm saying it because it matters strategically. Adversaries feel entitled. They're responding in kinds to decades of Western interference. Global South audiences are often unsympathetic to Western complaints about foreign interference. Moral clarity requires honesty. Democracies can only credibly defend a rules-based order if we acknowledge when we violated it ourselves. And here's the strategic point. The best defense is reducing exploitable fractures. That returns us to democratic reform and social cohesion. So, who are we facing today? Russia, the digitally enabled autocracy. Their doctrine is information confrontation, permanent competition below the threshold of war. Their objective is to weaken NATO cohesion, undermine the EU, prevent democratic contagion, as they call it, near their borders, and rehabilitate great power status. Methods: hack and leak, troll farms, state media like RT and Sputnik, proxy amplification, elite cultivation. China, the digital autocracy. Their doctrine is united front work and discourse power. Their objective is to prevent Taiwan alignment, neutralize criticism, build an alternative international order, and protect CCP legitimacy. Methods: platform investment, such as TikTok, elite capture, economic coercion, diaspora mobilization, academic influence. Iran, regional ambitions with global reach. Disinformation targeting domestic divisions, cyber operations targeting electoral processes. And then there are the threats from within the tent. Turkey, democratic backsliding while remaining inside NATO, transnational repression targeting diaspora, and direct attacks on Sweden's Muslim population. We saw this with the Quran burning, though Russia certainly played a hand in that as well. Turkey used that crisis to pressure Sweden on NATO accession and to target diaspora communities, while Russia amplified it to deepen divisions within Swedish society. It's a perfect example of how multiple actors pile onto the same fracture line for different purposes. Social cohesion vulnerabilities get weaponized from multiple directions simultaneously. Hungary, democratic backsliding within EU and NATO frameworks, secret espionage operations against allies, systemic obstruction of collective action, potential vector for Russian influence. And then there is our favorite neighbor, the United States, both as government and as tech sector. The current administration has shown alignment with authoritarian narratives, pressure on allies, democratic backsliding. Structural polarization means policy continuity is unreliable regardless of which administration is in power. But let me be direct about the tech platforms. Much of US tech is an adversary to democratic values, not a neutral actor, not neither ally nor adversary, an adversary. The founders and CEOs of these platforms seek to make themselves richer, and the way to do that is to exploit human emotion by stoking division and hate. Polarization is a moneymaker. Sadly, unity and kindness is not. These platforms are designed to maximize engagement, and engagement means outrage. The business model itself is adversarial to the conditions democracy needs to function. The fact that they're based in allied territory doesn't make them aligned with democratic interests. They require a regulatory approach, which is why the EU's DSA and DMA matter so much. The technological transformation is the accelerant. The actors I just described are not new. What's changed since 2022 is the technology. Generative AI has fundamentally altered the economics of cognitive warfare. What previously required troll farms with hundreds of human operators can now be accomplished by small teams with AI tools. Cost per operation has collapsed. Scale has exploded. Personalization is now possible at population level. AI-generated deepfakes have been observed in elections across Slovenia, Romania, Taiwan, India, and Turkey in 2020-24 to 2020-25. Volume is growing exponentially. Approximately 500,000 deepfake videos shared on social media in 2023, projected to reach 8 million in total calculation in 2025. And we're seeing how AI is being weaponized against women and girls right now. This month, Grok, the AI chatbot built into X, Elon Musk's platform, has been generating sexually explicit deepfake images of women and children. Users simply upload a photo and prompt, "Put her in a bikini," or "Remove her clothes," and the AI complies. One report found Grok generating approximately one non-consensual sexualized image per minute. Another estimated 3 million such images in a matter of days. The EU has launched an investigation. Malaysia and Indonesia banned Grok entirely, and Musk's response, he posted laughing emojis. This is cognitive warfare against half the population. It's designed to humiliate, silence, drive fear, and stoke fear and drive women out of public life. And it demonstrates that these platforms are not neutral infrastructure. They are actively hostile to democratic participation. And perhaps more damaging than fake content itself is what we call the liar's dividend. The mere existence of synthetic media erodes trust in all media. Authentic evidence can now be dismissed as probably AI. The capability itself degrades epistemic foundations. What success looks like for the adversary. It's not that they persuade you of their view. It's not conversion. The goal is paralysis. They succeed when citizens doubt their capacity to know what's true, institutions lose legitimacy to act, collective action becomes impossible, democracies turn inward, abandoning allies and international commitments, the democratic model loses appeal globally. The erosion pathway is trust to doubt, doubt to cynicism, cynicism to disengagement, disengagement to dysfunction. It's not instant collapse, it's gradual degradation. Success is making democracy too exhausting to sustain. Second argument, defense requires both resilience and response. This brings me to my second core argument. Democracy needs both resilience and response. Resilience alone is necessary, but insufficient. Absorbing attacks without cost imposition invites escalation. Adversaries calibrate to what democracies tolerate. We need layered defense in depth. Layer number one, societal resilience, the foundational layer. Trust, cohesion, civic capacity. Layer number two, digital literacy, individual capacity to navigate the information environment. Layer number three, intelligence and detection, institutional capability to identify operations in progress. Layer number four, active defense, attribution, exposure, cost imposition. Layer five, regulatory tools, platform accountability, legal frameworks. No single layer is sufficient. Defense in depth is required. Resilience without response invites escalation. Response without resilience lacks foundation. Each layer reinforces the other. This is the whole of society requirement. Government cannot do this alone. Civil society has a role in fact-checking, civic education, community resilience. Media has a role in quality journalism, resistance to capture. The private sector has a role in platform responsibility, cybersecurity, and citizens have a role in critical consumption and civic participation. What does active defense look like? Detection, identifying operations in progress. Attribution, determining responsibility with confidence. Exposure, making operations public. Cost imposition, diplomatic, economic, and regulatory consequences. France has pioneered the active defense model through Vichy Num, as it is pronounced, their agency for vigilance and protection against foreign digital interference, detection, attribution, and public exposure. The Netherlands has demonstrated attribution doctrine in practice. The EU has developed regulatory offense through DSA, DMA enforcement. But there's a tension here, and I want to be honest about it. Can democracies counter cognitive warfare without becoming what they oppose? AI-powered monitoring and counter-narrative systems, even when defending democracy, operate as a form of epistemic paternalism. Privacy, freedom of expression, freedom of the media, cognitive liberty itself, these are potentially affected. The answer isn't to refuse to act. The answer is democratic guardrails. Focus on foreign state-sponsored operations, not domestic speech, transparency about methods and scope, parliamentary and judicial oversight, preference for exposure over suppression, civic-led approaches that avoid state information control. My third core argument, no single democracy can secure its information environment alone. Traditional alliance structures cannot currently serve the collective security function when major allies have abandoned rule of law commitments. New coalition architectures are needed, organized around demonstrated commitment to rule of law rather than historical alliance membership. What does that look like in practice? Sweden has built the leading model for psychological defense through the MPF, the Swedish Psychological Defense Agency, and their Total Defense Framework. Psychological defense is one pillar of their total defense model, integration with military, civil, and economic defense. They monitor, detect, analyze, coordinate across government, communicate to the public, and build international cooperation. Finland remains the gold standard for societal resilience. They teach media literacy from early years. They run national defense courses for elites across sectors. They maintain broad engagement through their reserve system. High institutional trust is the foundation. But here's what I've learned from my research. Finland's success rests on factors that don't straightforwardly transfer to larger, more diverse democracies. 5.5 million people, living memory of the Soviet threat, relative homogeneity, among the world's highest baseline trust, geopolitical clarity about who the adversary is. Canada and Germany can't simply import Finnish or Swedish institutional architecture. We must pair institutional capacity with social cohesion, investment. Civic delivery mechanisms are needed alongside state capacity. Integration policy is cognitive defense policy. Lithuania leads on digital governance as cognitive defense, as does Estonia. France has pioneered the active defense model. The EU has developed regulatory tools through DSA, DMA. For Canada and other large democracies such as Germany, along with the EU and allied cooperation, the key recommendations are build layered defense models fit for purpose for each respective country, develop dedicated intelligence capacity for cognitive defense, align regulatory frameworks with DSA, DMA, strengthen the Canada-Germany Digital Alliance as a foundation for broader cooperation, address the social cohesion foundations that determine whether populations are resilient or vulnerable. So, let me close where I began. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Our adversaries understand this. They're targeting the citizen's mind and the universal human needs that make us vulnerable. They're exploiting our structural openness, our platform dependency, our fractures and divisions. They're deploying AI-enabled manipulation at scale, and they're betting that we won't recognize the war until we've already lost. but they're underestimating something. Once we see it, we can defend against it. The countries I've studied, Sweden, Finland, Lithuania, France, have demonstrated that democracies can build effective defenses. Defense requires both resilience and response. It requires whole of society integration. It requires international cooperation among democracies committed to rule of law. And it requires us to address the social cohesion foundations, the real grievances, the real exclusions, the real failures that determine whether populations are resilient or vulnerable. This isn't a problem we can delegate to intelligence agencies or platform regulation alone. Every one of us has a role to play. Critical consumption of information, civic participation, refusing to amplify manipulation, demanding better from our institutions, engaging with our fellow citizens across divisions. Geopolitical winter is coming. Some may already argue it is here. The question isn't whether we'll face this threat. The question is whether we'll face it prepared or unprepared, together or divided, awake or asleep. As I said, I believe hope is strategic. Those living without freedom understand the costs. Now it's our turn to prove we understand them too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was an absolutely fabulous presentation. And I, as the host, have the opportunity to ask the first question. And I would like to say that after that, Mike Hauner, you will be on deck to ask the next question afterward. So you were talking a lot about the various, I would think of them as middle powers, Sweden, Finland. And as our Prime Minister said last week, we as a middle power need to start looking at things. How on earth is Canada going to be able to deal with this when so much of our infrastructure is so integrated in with the US, and we have to try and get out of that group because of the total disintegration in trust and what's going on in that particular capital and country. So
great question. It's a multi-pronged response. So obviously further deintegration from the American ecosystem, in particular from reliance on US technology platforms, must happen. We must regulate US tech. We cannot, our societies must have guardrails like the DSA, like the DMA. It will cause us problems significantly with the US administration as they have made tech independence, freedom without any guardrails part of their foreign policy. But this is a cost that we must pay. The threats to our democracy are too grave if we do not. At the same time, a huge part of our defense comes very much from our own societal cohesion and will to resist. We have to ensure that we are investing within our own communities. We have to ensure that we are helping break down barriers and disunity as we see it across Canadians, whether that be through factions that are incentivized or amplified through identity politics and divisiveness, or whether that is, again, lobbying for greater social policy to ensure that those who are most vulnerable are taken care of, that their basic needs are met.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a big ask for a lot of people, especially right now in Canada when we start hearing Alberta wanting to separate. Some people looking to that, Quebec, the same sort of thing, and all of the issues associated with housing and power. And those of us in this particular organization are well aware of the fact that we have a very quick moving, geologically speaking, climate crisis coming our way, which is going to totally affect everything else.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's going to be.
So I would only respond before you go to the next question with saying we can't let the gravity or vastness of the challenge overwhelm us to the point where we don't act. This is my point about hope being strategic. We have to believe that it can get better. We have to believe that progress is possible, and we have to fight and take one small step at a time. One small step still gets us closer to solving the problem than none at all. And I don't mistake the gravity and the complexity of solving this problem, but it is too existential to our very way of life to do nothing about it.
Thank you. With that, Mike Hanauer, I would ask you to please turn on your video and ask your question. And Paul Beckwith, you are on deck. So you can also unmute and get yourself going. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Elizabeth, thank you for all of your perception on what's going on here. The question I want to ask is sort of multifaceted, but it seems to me that the people you didn't indict here is Canada itself. It seems to me over the last 20, 30, 40 years, Canada has tried to become very much like the United States. You know, you want to grow to 100 million people. You want to further industrialize. Cities like Toronto are like, you know, really ugly, becoming ugly American cities in a lot of ways. And then on top of that, I question whether with our overpopulation almost everywhere, democracy is even possible. That we need a kind dictator to attack the major problems in the world that we're making. Your comments on some of that, please.
Sure. So I would challenge a bit of your frame. I certainly, there is plenty of mud to be thrown at ourselves in terms of some of the problems that we in Canada have created. And that's a bipartisan challenge of several decades. I agree to a certain extent that, especially since NAFTA was formally signed, and especially since the end of the Cold War, that Canada has politically and economically moved to closer integration with the United States. I would challenge that our culture, however, is more American, especially your comments about Toronto. But I take your point that criticism can absolutely be found at home. And we should shine a light on it. It is impossible. As I said, we must face the truths, however uncomfortable or inconvenient they are. We must be honest with ourselves. I would argue that our Prime Minister Carney, had just gave this big speech in Davos that is getting international acclaim. And he is certainly not a dictator. And he has found a message that resonates with many Canadians, but also many global leaders and citizens of countries across the globe. I come from a foreign affairs background. Now, in fairness, a lot of my contacts are in Europe, but I have still heard from colleagues all around the world about this speech and the hope that they feel that it has given them the clarity and resolve that he expressed. And I do think that there is some argument to be said that when people are extremely frustrated with the system, then they are happy to find someone who is willing to just break it, and they don't care about the chaos that ensues. At the same time, I think that most democratic countries are not as close to that knife's edge as I would argue the United States as a democracy, unfortunately, finds itself today.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for that. Paul Beckwith, you are on now, and Art Hunter, you are on deck.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth, for all your work and this great talk. I have put a lot of comments in in so far. And but let me talk about the CBC, Canada's national TV and radio. And they've had problems. There's lots of threats to their very survival. I would think with in today's climate, they could get more funding and they could actually appeal to a broader array of Canadians. Because right now, there's an argument. There's a good book that was just published by a prominent CBC person. This is the book here. It just came out, and it's about the history of the CBC, the importance of it, why it's lost favor with people on the right. It's seen as too narrow, the programming
Yep.
too progressive. It needs to change. They need new people, needs more funding. I think it should become a very strong way of Canadians getting information from Canada. I mean, it struggled throughout its history with American programming, et cetera, competing against private programs. So do you have some views on, I mean, if the Conservatives got in, they'd kill it on the first day. They've said that's what they'll do. They'll defund it completely. It'll disappear. So do you have some ideas and views on the CBC, both TV and radio?
I absolutely do. So I appreciate the question very much. I am an advocate for CBC and in general media that is not state sponsored, as our opponents of CBC would say, but state funded media so that they can be unencumbered by
Right.
financial worries and can do the investigative journalism and things like this that is so essential for our democracy. I think we should fund CBC well enough. I think we should get rid of ads. I think CBC should have no revenue from advertisements. I think that we should fund it well enough that it is completely ad free. I think that we should significantly increase our funding of CBC, both the English version of CBC and Radio Canada. And in my opinion, I think that CBC should become an international source of news in both English and in French. I get this comment a lot from people that say, traditional sources of media are dying, so why would Canada invest more in CBC? What difference is that going to make? Well, the difference is that it's more information that is truthful. And especially if we spread it internationally, people do find that information, and it is in terms of the scope, you might have years to take for it to expand to really take effect in terms of if we were to make CBC an international body. But in a world where so much disinformation is happening, to have a trusted source of media that people can go to, that people can rely on, is extremely important. And this happened in the Cold War. We did this with Voice of America, and we did this with Free Europe. And it mattered to people behind the red wall. It mattered. People looked at that information as credible, and we have the ability to have promotion of true, clear investigative journalism in both English and in French. And we could and should take over more of that responsibility from the Canadian perspective. We have one of the best trusted brands in the world, and we should use that as a source of positive influence in the information and in the information space and media ecosystem.
Right, but how do we get the Conservatives to support the CBC? I mean, traditionally, if you look at the history, they've often been opposed to it. It was actually a Conservative that was important in founding it, Bennett, I believe. But the argument is that it's become too narrow and too
Yep.
woke and too far left. And why don't they talk about more global issues and get away from the sort of politics of wokeness and gender, transgender stuff? Because I often turn it off when there's programs on because the programs are of no interest to many people, I think. Like they've become
So,
too narrow. So we need to get conservative buy-in so when they get in power, if and when, the CBC survives.
so I agree with that. I think more money into the system and a mandate that the CBC must shake itself up and diversify and expand its content is very helpful. I don't think that you will get initially conservative buy-in. I think CBC canceling X, the CBC, is a great talking point for the conservatives, and that's not where the base of the party is right now. But I think if you implement the changes positively, if they start producing more content that has greater diversity and a greater span in terms of audience reach, then I think that the just by action, we will bring more conservatives on board with keeping the CBC. So I would worry less about the argument now.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Art Hunter, you are up next, and Bill Reese, you are on deck.
Yeah, I'd just like to congratulate you, Elizabeth. That was quite an impressive speech. You've obviously researched this extensively and spent a lot of time on it.
I appreciate that.
I'd like to point out to you that there are two of us on this call, John Legg and myself, who attended a one-year course at the National Defense College before it was defunded about 30 years ago. And much of what you said, of course, was the theme of the NDC at the time. Now, I wanted to try and explore a little bit of the world of influence and how this migrates into weaponization. Because we're constantly being influenced, and contrary to that, we're also influencing others. This is the way societies interact. This is what we do all the time. And to cross that border into weaponization, I'd like to explore that with you to help me understand how one steps over that border. But I want to just make one other point before we get to the weaponization, that we have had since World War II the Five Eyes. That was an intelligence hangover, and that's the Canada, US, Australia, UK, and New Zealand. That I presume up until about a year ago, it was still functioning as a threat analysis international body. I don't know what's happened since the election of Trump a year ago, whether that has deteriorated as badly as NATO and the UN, etc. The answer is probably yes. But I'd appreciate any comments you have on the Five Eyes and if it is still a viable threat analysis tool. But let's get back to the difference between influence and weaponization.
So I'll start with the Five Eyes because it's a shorter answer and a simpler one than the main question you've posed. Given Tulsi Gabbard, who is a known Russian asset, is the National Security Advisor of the United States. No, the Five Eyes network is not functioning as it should be. There is mistrust within the system. How much information can we share? Most particularly on human source intelligence. I would argue, would be putting our own Canadians and the Brits equally, et cetera, at risk if you were to share it with the Americans at present. I think that we need to expand our intelligence capabilities and cooperation with other allies. And by the way, we're the only G7 country without a foreign intelligence agency. And this is, one, disgraceful, in my opinion, and two, a huge weakness of us. We need more intelligence capacity, not less. So there are some opportunities for Canada to make up in quicker time span on this. We can invest in ISR in terms of satellite and cyber intelligence. Some of these areas where we already have the technological capabilities, if we just put the money and the intent behind them. But in terms of human intelligence, it's going to take us a long time to get up to where we need to be. But we must start today. We should have started yesterday, but today is better than never, and certainly better than tomorrow. On the question of weaponization of information, I appreciate the question very much because it provides me an opportunity to clarify my comments. As I said, this is a very hard line to walk, and it's a very fine line for democracies, because if we walk just 1 inch too far, we are becoming what we oppose. And that is not the way to go. And at the same time, not acting at all is ensuring that we are weakened, and we would be helping our adversaries do their job for them. So from my perspective, as I said, we should focus on foreign state-sponsored operations, not domestic speech. We should focus on transparency about methods and scope, have strong oversight bodies, preference for exposure over suppression, civic-led approaches that avoid state information control. The way that the French do it, which costs a lot of money, it was set up in the president's office back in 2022, is a lot about detection, identification, public exposure to such campaigns, and then they try and actually hold them accountable, whether that be through diplomatic action, economic response, or regulatory changes. These are things that are concrete actions that we can do that make the cost of such operations higher for our adversaries to run them, but it doesn't get into the game of weaponizing information. We should never get into the game of weaponizing information. We are democracies. That's the whole point of our values-based system, and we can't sell the foundational principles of our values in order, quote unquote, to protect us. So it's a very fine line to walk. You might have governments step 1 inch too far, and then there needs to be correction, and citizens have to hold governments account on this, which again leads me back to greater civic participation within our democracy. That needs to become our responsibility as citizens.
Okay, thank you. And of course, I just want to make sure that everyone here recognizes that we do have the International Security Intelligence Service. That's still functional, as is the Communication Security Establishment in Canada. And the mere fact that sharing information with the Americans doesn't mean that we all down tools and are completely exposed. These agencies are alive and well and doing
Absolutely.
threat analysis and finding back channels to share information with the rest of the Five Eyes.
In particular, our cyber capabilities at CSE are extremely strong. Even amongst our allies, we are leaders. And CSIS does a great job in terms of its intelligence performance, but they are regulated, mandated by Parliament to be domestic, and they are not supposed to be international. And I would argue there's been mission creep over the years because we don't have an international intelligence body, but the whole point of the legislation was specifically so that they could be domestic. So if we're going to have them have international capacity, then we need to change the legislation, and it needs to be a purposeful move, not a mission creep where they get to expand their mandate simply because it's necessary and they have found wiggle room in order to be able to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I am going to be calling on Bill Reese in a minute. And those of you on deck, I'm going to be calling people up who have not had an opportunity to speak yet. So I will be doing that in order. And then those who've made extra comments and questions can be brought up as needed. So Bill, you're on, and on deck is Peter McKinnon.
Thank you very much, Jean. And thank you, Elizabeth. I've learned a great deal from your discussion. My question is simple. South of the border, we see probably the best example in recent history of the very rapid transition that you're warning us against. And yet you scarcely touched on it in the whole course of your talk. Now, I understand you've done most of your research on European countries, so that's perhaps understandable. But don't we have a huge lesson to learn about the rapidity with which what we've seen in the States is a cognitive revolution? We've long known that psychopaths and sociopaths tend to accumulate at the top of major organizations. But this may be the first time we've seen visibly happening as a matter of history, where a bunch of psychopaths have taken over the government of the most powerful nation on the planet. These are certifiable people, pathological narcissists, murderers, marine pirate. I mean, all of these terms apply to Trump, and yet you skip by without even mentioning that this is a real risk to Canada. And now we have Scott Bessent trying to stir up the rebels in Alberta. I mean, this is direct interference in Canadian affairs, not, manipulation behind the scenes. It's visible to everyone. And yet you're silent. You're silent.
I would challenge that. I certainly, as I said in my speech, claimed that U.S. tech is an adversary and that the United States and this administration is starting to become a threat from within inside the tent. So it was not the greatest focus within my speech, but it was certainly noted. And for the record, I very much agree with you that it's extremely alarming what is happening in the United States. What Scott Bessent said about the Alberta referendum is deeply disturbing. I would argue it's actually better that he said it out loud and in public, because what I'm more concerned about is what sources of funds or mechanisms of subversion and covert campaigns the Americans plan on deploying for the Alberta referendum. I think that Canadians, depending on the poll that you look at, 59 to 67% of Canadians believe the greatest threat to our sovereignty and security is the United States of America, and I would be in that camp. I don't like that. I think that we are going to have to cooperate with the United States regardless of whether we want to or not. You can't take a saw to our border. Continental defense, for example, will always rely on the Americans, and our economy will always be significantly tied to them. At the same time, I very much appreciate and support the Prime Minister and the government's move to diversify our economy away from them. And I think that they should do far more about regulating U.S. tech. I think it's one of the greatest gaps or weaknesses of their current policy in terms of what their rhetoric is versus their actions. And I think that I've been very thrilled by Canada's response in terms of elbows up and the move to sell summer homes for snowbirds, to reduce vacations, all these things. I was down in Washington, D.C. when all these threats started. I have more articles of red clothing than I've ever had. And I'm half Sicilian, so in general, I'm always a bit feisty, but I'm quite fiery these days when it comes to the United States. So I completely back your deep concern with the U.S. administration. I think that it's a great example of what happens when you allow money to run freely in your political system. I am extremely grateful for the amount of minimal money that we have in our politics. It keeps our politics to the ground of the people. I think that the government is eyes wide open about the threat to the United States. I think they're trying to walk a very delicate, fine line, given how much of our economy is tied to them. At the same time, I hold out hope that they will walk the right path. And I've been very happy to see, as controversial as Carney's trip to China was, I'm supportive of it. I was very happy to see his speech in Davos. And just because I'm supportive of some of these policies does not mean I'm going to hold them, the flame, their butts to the flame of the fire to ensure that they continue to walk this line. Because I very much agree with you. This is, for us, the greatest threat to our sovereignty and security.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next we have Peter McKinnon, if you can unmute. And on deck, we have Virginia Hammond.
Thank you, Jean. And Elizabeth, thank you very much for your Very active presentation. I like the way you present it. I'm following on from Bill. I'm very concerned about U.S. interference in Canadian affairs, and in particular the recent events around Alberta. I'm just wondering what you might have as a prescription as to what's going on and what might go on from a U.S. interference point of view, and obviously why they would be wanting to do this. Is it to break up Canada? Is it to take over Canada? Is it something else?
So I think the United States wants Canada to implement policies that are in favor of what the United States wants. They essentially want us to become a proxy government of theirs. I always obviously what Russia is doing to Ukraine in terms of the war far exceeds the comparison is not completely apple to apple. So do not think that I am comparing identically. But in terms of how the Americans view us, we are in their sphere of influence. They don't want us outside of it. And it is to them something that they believe is existential if Canada was to become independent from US decisions. So I think all of their moves, I don't think that they really care about the breaking up of Canada in terms of a strategic objective. I think that they care about Canada not being able to have enough unity and cohesion to defend ourselves against them, and to have the willpower to continue to make decisions that might be painful in the short term, but that are very much in our medium to long-term interests. I think the fact that the Secretary of Commerce is openly talking about the Alberta referendum and throwing, stoking the
Bombs.
fire
Yes.
is deeply concerning. I'm not surprised by it. And as I said, what I would be much more concerned about is all that they're going to do covertly, whether that be through MAGA influencers, whether that be through influence operations that they actually dole out within their own government agencies. I think that we should be playing every scenario possible and not believe that something is, too far past the realm of the possible. I think that the last year has shown us that what we believe was in the realm of the possible is no longer the frame in which we should be viewing the world. I think even recently, the stuff about Greenland, the stuff about the United States, the president and talking about NATO allies haven't done anything for the Americans, that they weren't at the front in Afghanistan. It's repugnant to say the least.
Yes.
But again, a year ago wouldn't have been possible. So I would deeply believe that they will interfere within the Alberta referendum. I think that it is also, if the Alberta referendum becomes truly challenging, then the federal government is going to have to spend more of their political capacity and their time focused on saving the Federation, and less of their time diversifying our economy, flying around the world, and building our diplomatic relations. So again, in terms of cognitive warfare about sowing societal distrust, disunity, ensuring that our cohesiveness is not as strong as it once was. These are their objectives. So I don't think that they care so much about whether Canada breaks up or not. I just think that they want to ensure that they can make us capitulate to their demands in whatever way possible. And the Alberta referendum, unfortunately, provides them with an excellent opportunity to do so. So from everyone on this call, in terms of what we can do, we can champion the Federalist message. We can speak out about it. We can talk to our friends in Alberta. And I think we need to be active lobbyists of why being a part of the Federation is in Alberta's best interest.
Well, it's a democratic process that Alberta is going to pursue, which is a legal thing. Yet
Yeah.
the American government seems to want to do some, quote, illegal things to interfere with the democratic process in their neighboring country. I'm just
Absolutely.
wondering and this could be a question for later on, but I'd like to pose it. What are the American general people's reaction to this? Well, let's call it the Canadian file, the Canada file. I mean, Canadians and Americans have been traditionally very close, as we all know. So, what do the American people like outside of the MAGA group, or maybe even they have views on it that are friendlier than we hear from Washington.
So I'll just answer this from my own perspective. I obviously can't speak to all of the American people, but from my experience from being in DC, hosted at a think tank that was bipartisan, the Center for a New American Security, the boardroom had a view of the White House, so you were truly right in the thick of it. I think that there is about 15% of, so leave aside the people that are, anything Donald Trump does, they're gung-ho supporters of. Leave those people aside. Of the rest, I think 15% are genuinely horrified, and they would come up to me and apologize for the treatment of the president and the United States to our country. They are allies of Canada. They are lovers of elbows up, and they are wishing us well in our defense. I think there is another 20% that feel that way, but also feel very uncomfortable about it. So they would rather just not talk about it. And if you brought it up, based on their face, they agree with you, but also unpleasant, uncomfortable. What can I do? So I'm just going to stay silent. Then there's a host of people that I met that were kind of like, well, if Canada joined the United States, the Republicans would never get in again, and we would be Democrat forever. Which I always said that's a you problem. That's not a me problem. And then there's another, I don't know, 15% that basically think that it's a lot of rhetoric. We're overreacting. They diminish it. He's not serious. This is just how it is. And you just have to accept that. And then, to be perfectly honest, there was a surprising 15%, that when I was down there, they would tell me things like, we haven't taken ourselves seriously enough as a country because we haven't put in money to defense, and therefore, basically, we get what we deserve, which was truly an astonishing impression. Again, these aren't from like MAGA giant supporters. This was from ordinary, maybe they voted Republican, but they're not, the bandwagon. They're not wearing Make America Great Again hats. And they very openly said to my face that we were getting what we deserved.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Virginia, you are up now, so you can ask your question. And on deck, we have Richard van der Yak. Virginia, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, Virginia didn't seem to respond. So Richard, you are up, and on deck we have Charles Hall. And Virginia, when you come back, we can get you on. Richard, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth, I liked your talk. It was very good. But there are a couple points. One, you sort of alluded to it. Don't you think Carney's Davos speech was one that really is a movement towards getting us out of this groupthink where we all have to follow the path of the U.S. And he's trying to get us out of that groupthink, and that's one of the questions I wanted to ask. The second thing I just wanted to mention to you is that CSIS, you mentioned, is only working domestically. I don't think that's correct, because I have a friend and neighbor, well, former neighbor, he's now deceased, who worked for CSIS and actually was stationed in France for some time.
So I'll answer them in opposite order. They aren't only working domestically. They have achieved mission creep. There are CSIS agents that are posted to different embassies abroad. But in the legislation, it is very clearly defined that CSIS is not meant to be an international intelligence organization. They were very specifically meant to be domestic, and that was a decision that the parliamentarians at the time made. And my point is that mission creep does not help us. CSIS does not have the actual legislative mandate to be doing that. And they feel that they are justified because Canada should be operating internationally, which I agree with. But they don't have the legislation to back it up. So we either need to bring in legislation that allows them to have an international mandate, or we need to create a separate body, a different international foreign intelligence service. I would argue most of our countries, everyone in the G7 does domestic intelligence and foreign intelligence separately. In the UK, you would have the MI5 versus MI6. I think that this is where this should lie. I do not believe that the two intelligence services should overlap. There are plenty of people who will oppose that opinion, but my point is that it's mission creep, and I want the mission creep to go away. Mandate it, regulate it one way or the other, choose a lane, but don't have it be mission creep, which is what it has been for the last, since 9/11, since the creation of CSIS, really. And can you please nudge me on your
The Davos speech.
Davos?
Yeah.
Yes, he is absolutely defining a new path. He is trying to tell middle powers that we have an alternative, that we do not have to. The United States has this frame of you're either with us or with China. It feels very reminiscent of George W. Bush's "you're either with us or with the terrorists." That is not a frame in which we have to accept. That is not reality for most countries, and we shouldn't allow it to be. We have power in numbers, and if middle powers work together with other small countries to build a system, some kind of international rule of law that we can all, or more of us than not, can prescribe to, this is in very much the way forward. And I hope that the Carney government comes up with clear policy ideas in terms of how that coalition can be built. But I think the message is necessary to have sent. I think you're absolutely right. Hit the nail on the head, as they say. And I think that we very much need to reject this framing that we either have to be with the United States or with China.
I wish we would get out of the chasing another oil pipeline, which we don't need and no one's interested in investing. And it's only going to put the taxpayer back another $35 billion for toxic GHGs, which we don't need. And there's now renewable energy, which we can invest in and much better off.
So this very much goes beyond the scope of my presentation. So take my opinion for what it's worth. But since you brought it up, I worked in politics for 7 years. I still have friends that work in the Carney government on the political side. My read of that situation is that he's very much trying to keep Danielle Smith inside the tent instead of outside of it. The threat of the referendum from a societal cohesion, our federation remaining together is quite existential for Canada. And if Danielle Smith is somewhat pleased as an Alberta premier can be with a liberal federal government, then she will speak out in favor of federation. And that helps us a lot more than her paying lip service to the separatist movement. I don't think the pipeline is ever going to be built ever. It has to go through BC. They don't want it. It has to go through Indigenous land. They don't want it. But putting it in a referendum or a memorandum of understanding allows Danielle to feel like she got a win and the Carney government is listening to her without actually ever doing anything to build the pipeline. I don't think that this is ever going to be built. I think that this was a method that they were interested of trying to ensure that the premier stopped going off on her own and stuck to the notion that she becomes a champion for the federation remaining together.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And Virginia Hammond's was mostly a comment that she was making. So I would strongly encourage everyone who wishes to look at what she had said to look at the chat record when it comes out. Charlie Hall, you are on now, and on deck is John Hollins.
I also like very much your presentation and your methods, and I liked your professionalization of something that I saw around me and I didn't quite know how to deal with. And I'm going to invite you to have a U.S. audience. I'm from the U.S. I've been wanting to ask this question since the middle of your talk, because the only criticism I would have is that it's sounds a little Cold Warian that you talk about China this and US that and so forth. And you should know that whatever the policies are of Trump, he's aimed at least as much as, well, much more at me than Canadians. you know, I like Canadians fine mostly. Certainly can tolerate them. And you talk as if America is doing this to you. There's only a quarter, less than a quarter of Americans, of US people, who voted for Trump.
Mhm.
And one thing that's happened is the taking over of government by fair means and foul by the Republican Party, where they have many more representatives than they had votes for those representatives through gerrymandering, et cetera, and all kinds of stuff. So I think you need to be more careful in attributing to nations. I don't think most Chinese have any particular problem with America. They just go about their life and don't think about it. Or as Jeff said here, you know, most Americans don't think about Canadians. It's there's an elite. Well, they're not an elite in the good sense of the word, but they're a small percentage of despots that have taken over governments that then do all the things that you say, partly, and yet in your words seem to attribute them to the action of entire nations when most nations don't have those attitudes at all. It's only their leaders or their oligarchs or whatever you call them, or whatever. And so if you can change your wording a little bit, but anyway, really good job. And are you willing to talk to people south of the border? I'll try to set something up.
I'm absolutely willing to talk to people south of the border. I have professional colleagues, both Democrat and Republican, that I continue to speak with. To be very clear, citizens of governments, citizens of states, are not the ones that are perpetrating any of these policies. The Chinese citizens that live in China are not perpetrating what the CCP does. Americans individually are not perpetrating what the American administration does. But in terms of warfare is engaged at the state level. So what the United States administration is doing is, from a warfare perspective, America. It's not saying that it's Americans, but America is engaged in these activities, and America is currently a threat to our sovereignty and our security, in my opinion. I very much hope that our American colleagues respond through their democratic processes, continue to engage in the democratic process, no matter how hard the administration tries to make that for individuals. I think the fact that you can't, in certain states, give someone water when you're waiting in line is just one of the many ways in which they are trying to suppress the vote. So I encourage all my American friends and colleagues to ensure that they participate in democracy. People have the power. The power can only be taken away from the people when they have it, if they are willingly give it up. So fight like hell to ensure that your democracy stands.
Thank you for that. And we have about 5 other people wanting to ask some questions, and we're coming up to 5 minutes left. So I would ask that you make very quick questions if you can. So John Hollins, you are on, and Jeff, you are on deck.
Jean, my point's already made. Sorry.
Okay, fair enough. Jeff, you are on.
Yeah, thanks, Jean. And I really don't have a question so much as, but Elizabeth might want to make a comment on this. There's so many things that Elizabeth has said that are worth pursuing. And I put some in the comment file about the CBC and about, how Americans don't really, Canadians have an overblown sense of their own importance. But my question really is with respect to Davos. How many other countries do you think will actually take their sign out of the window? And then are Canadians, or have they even thought about the hardships that will come from us taking our sign out of the window. I mean, there's no taking away from the fact that we rely on the US for about 70%, some people would say as high as 80% of our exports. Even if we were to double the amount of exports that we trade we do with other countries, we would still rely on the US for at least 60% of our exports. So just your thoughts.
So, this was my point earlier about we cannot take a chainsaw to the border. We cannot completely disavow ourselves of the United States. We, by geographic necessity, are going to need to cooperate with them, regardless of what the administration looks like, regardless of what the state of their democracy looks like. I think that Canadians actually have, for the most part, thought about and understood the consequences of what is going to come when we are fighting. I think that the public opinion polling and the support for the Prime Minister to be hard on the United States and to not give away, to not sell the cart with the horse, to defend our sovereignty, to defend Canada and our economy remains very high. Now, that doesn't mean that it won't diminish once we actually start feeling the effects of that economic hardship. This is why I would say we should be as strong as possible from the start, because inevitably, when Canadian citizens start feeling greater economic hardship, some of that will to resist will go down. But I overall think that Canadians are quite practical and quite, don't mistake our kindness for our inability to be tough. And we survive in terribly cold weather. I think that makes us tough as a population in general. And I think we have a long history of defending our sovereignty against the United States. Goodness, our country was founded upon, the Federation was founded upon the fact that we didn't want to be a part of the US. So I think that we are willing to pay those consequences. I think that the people that believe strongly should continue to speak out against the arguments of individuals that basically say that it's too much cost and we should just please the Americans. Capitulation never works. And I think that there is more Canadians that feel like me that are ready to fight than there are not. So we just have to be strong, and we have to continue to hold the government, again, the flame to their feet to the fire, to ensure that they hold. But I think that that's what they very much heard on the doorsteps when they knocked doors in the last election. And I think that for as long as Canadians are willing to do it, the government is very much willing to put the policies in place.
In the last election, nobody had used the term "take the sign out of the window." I mean, I agree with you. I think Canadians are resilient and tough. I hope we will continue to be elbows up. You're absolutely right about capitulation. I mean, Prime Minister Starmer proved that. You know, he capitulated, and then what did he get? Another slap in the face.
I do think
Thanks.
that, no problem, on your signs of the window, and I do have some extra time, so don't worry, I'll get to the questions remaining. I do think that countries will increasingly take the sign out of the window because the Americans keep selling the point for us. With the treatment and bullying tactics that they have, people are coming around to the idea that as inconvenient and unpleasant as a reality as the one we find ourselves in, it is the reality. It's not going away. And again, I think Chantal Hébert said it on CBC, I think on PNP the other day.
That issue.
It was so, yeah, it was so resonant to leaders and to citizens across the world because he said what people are thinking. So I actually do think that more countries are going to follow suit and take the signs out of the window.
Thank you very much. John Legge, you are up, and I have Lizzie Siriani on deck. John, can you ask your question, please? Sorry, I hadn't given him a heads up yet, so.
Right, okay. Is that better, at least?
Yes, thank you.
And there. Very good talk. Very good talk, Elizabeth. Thank you. I'm an old and very, very old, I guess, Cold Warrior. Was with Foreign Affairs for 31 years. My question is, what is the best way of countering the naivete of Trump? He is Putin's best ally. And can we be open about it? I mean, it's a disaster. As an old Cold Warrior, I mean, I don't need another one sitting there in the White House. I know I'm exaggerating, but you can tell I'm very upset. Anyway,
I think you have every reason to be very upset. I've long been on. Look, you can perceive it from either Trump is the term is a useful idiot to Putin, to all the way of Trump is a Russian asset. I think that it is unlikely that Trump is genuinely a Russian asset, but I personally think that there is no argument that he is acting as a foolish idiot for Putin. I think that people get off put when you sell it in such straight terms, even if the straight terms are valid. I think that you should draw parallels of the actions and the rhetoric that Trump is having, or the policies that they're having in the alignment with Russia. So, for example, the NSS, the National Security Strategy, the Kremlin came out and endorsed the strategy. That's an official endorsement by the Russian government. That is not an endorsement that one should want. That is a horrifying state of affairs. So pointing these things out does the job without having to say that Trump is a useful idiot, or without having to say Trump is an asset.
okay, and I did not realize that, and I thank you. That's very valuable information. Thank you.
Thank you for that, John. Lizzie Siriani, you are up now, and on deck is Steve Kurtz.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thanks. I really enjoyed your presentation. I'm calling in from Minneapolis, Minnesota, so another U.S. Individual, also somewhat at the center of a lot of Trump's internal actions recently. My question for you is, if we do make this out of this administration, what policies do you see as most urgent to restoring some type of cognitive security within the U.S., which obviously will have big international effects?
First, I'm really sorry for what is happening to your city. I genuinely find it physically painful to watch. And I just think that the lack of humanity that is being shown is truly remarkable, that it is happening in the United States. And I don't think that anyone should downplay it. I think that everyone should speak out against it. It is the worst of humanity. And I'm very sorry. In terms of the policies that I think are most necessary in the United States, although, again, not as a US expert, I truly don't know how one implements them. I really think that the money in American politics is the biggest problem. I think that any policy change that you make without solving the money problem, at least curtail it somewhat. That's far and away, that amplifies all of the other problems. And how I know that you have the Supreme Court ruling. I don't know how you get around the Supreme Court ruling, but in Canada, I can tell you, again, having worked in politics, because our politics is so close to the ground of the citizens, I'm not saying that the governments do everything that, Canadians want, or the Canadians are overwhelmingly always happy with what the government is doing. But on the issues that Canadians really care about, the government has to respond, because all governments, all political parties want to remain in power. And in order to remain in power, you actually have to attend to the needs and concerns of your citizens. In America, you've gotten away from having to tend to the needs of your citizens, at least to an extent that it should be there, because who is particularly influential is special interest, whether that be corporations or whether that be the extremely affluent among the 4,500 billionaire class that the United States has. So again, I I don't know how to go about that, but I really do think that until you solve the problem of money in politics, you will continue to have grave problems within your democracy. So finding experts that actually do have some solutions and policy suggestions on that, building coalitions, et cetera, the better. And I will also say, again, going back to the point, Americans do not speak. The government is not the citizens. We need to build more people-to-people ties for people that are fighting for democratic values across borders. Democratic values know no borders, and we are all better when our democracies are strong and vibrant. So the more collaboration that we can build across borders with American citizens that are just as determined to live in a democratic way of life, the better. So a pleasure to meet you. And again, my sincere apologies.
Thank you. Appreciate the kind words.
Thank you very much for that response, Elizabeth. Very heartfelt. We all agree with you on that one. For our final questioner is Steve Kurtz. And after that, we will be finished the Q&A session for now. Steve?
Jean, Steve actually wrote that he made comments. Sorry, I'll let him talk.
Yeah, hi. I'm trying to get my video up. Let's just. Okay, let's try that. Start my video. Let's try that. Okay, hi. Well, I made two comments. I really didn't have a question. They're in the chat. One was about multiculturalism and mass migration, which has exacerbated the difficulties of communicating the common values that positive information, or what I call probability-based education, can get through to the populace. And my last comment was just noting that I was the one who found Elizabeth Anderson online through a comment on one of the social media. I don't remember which one. And I was impressed, and that's why I emailed her and invited her, asked her if she was interested, and then had the powers that be carry it on from there. And the reason I didn't choose to try to moderate this is that I'm really out of my depth with Canadian government structure and politics, being only having lived up there for not quite 8 years and became a dual citizen, but I'm born a Yank. So anyway, thanks for coming. And my comment said that I would hope that you would consider joining CACOR and would then network with colleagues and invite them to do likewise, because more of your generation would be great for this organization. So thank you very much.
I appreciate your comments, Steve, and I'm very happy that you found me and encouraged me to participate. It's been a great experience thus far, and I don't see any reason why greater participation in the future cannot be had.
Great, thank you.
Virginia, did you want to ask or make your comment that you had posted?
Well, what I posted was the link to the site I'm just launching. I'm a perennial optimist about the book Getting to Yes came out in 1981, and it's been on bestseller lists for almost 50 years. There are a lot of people out there who know how to make good decisions, and I'm just hoping we can create a platform where we can model that kind of good democracy. And it matched one of your the improving civic engagement opportunities. I really, although a lot of what you had to say is kind of discouraging, and I really appreciated your talk. I'll go back and catch the bits I missed when I had to run off. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Virginia.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for an absolutely phenomenal presentation today. And with that, I would like to say, I would ask Raymond Lurie to give the thanks on behalf of our board of directors. Thank you.
Okay, well, like like Jean said, I would like to very much thank you for your presentation today. Very good and very timely topic, and I'm sure that this will spark even more discussions after this particular presentation. For those of you who are online or going to watch a recording, we invite you to engage more with us and become a member. We're always looking for new members, and we would appreciate if you would join us. So on that note, thanks again, and we'll see you soon.